You want to grow your author business, but you have no money. How are you going to do it? In this video, we're going to go over 3 strategies to help you grow your author business when you have no cash, and none of them involve just waiting until you magically have more of it. And then the last of those 3, we're going to talk about how to use debt the right way whenever you have to, so stick around for that. There's 2 scenarios where I've seen this play out, and they're basically the same thing. Either you're just starting out and you're looking at the quotes for cover designs and editing and formatting, and you're realizing that you have to pay for a lot of these things before you sell a single book. So how do you do that? Even if you do pre-orders, sometimes you have to pay for some of these things before the pre-order can even go live. Or maybe you've been doing this for a long time, but your income only covers your actual expenses and there's nothing left over to really invest in growth. So all 3 of these strategies are going to focus on leverage. Remember back to your high school physics class where we played with the little levers, and depending on where you pushed it, you got the most work out of it for the least amount of effort. We're going to be doing the same thing, 3 unique strategies on how to apply leverage to get the most out of what you can put into your business, and it doesn't necessarily have to be cash. Before I jump in, we're going to be talking about some of these strategies in more depth in our author community. If you want to join that conversation, the link's in the description. Okay, so strategy number 1 is using your own expertise to reduce barriers to entry. What does all that mean? Every single business has barriers to entry. Think about if you want to become a doctor, you have to go to college, you have to go to medical school, you have to graduate medical school, you have to take all these tests. It's a really high barrier to entry. There's not an unlimited supply of doctors in the world because it's so hard to become a doctor. But there's still a high demand for doctors, and so doctors get to have a high pay because there's a low supply and there's a high barrier to entry. Same thing with something like a manufacturing plant. To be able to have all the equipment and all the space and all the real estate and all the labor that you need before you ever even manufacture your first thing costs a lot of money. And so that's why it's hard to get into something like manufacturing, because there's such a high barrier to entry. Every business has barriers. The first barrier you're going to find with an author business is you have to write a book, and that's actually a pretty big barrier. Not everybody can write a book, but everyone who is an author has written a book, and so there's a level playing field there. So because the barriers to entering the author industry are fairly low relative to things like becoming a doctor or opening a manufacturing business, you really almost have to create your own barriers. In other words, you have to be able to invest more than people normally would in order to stand out. So for example, if you cheap out on cover design, your cover's not going to stand out in a market saturated with other books with good cover designs. If you cheap out on editing and somebody reads your book and they find a bunch of mistakes in it and plot holes, then you're not going to get good reviews and you might not have good read through. So the more that you can invest in things like cover design, editing, formatting, website development, all those things, that's all going to play into the barrier that you've created for yourself to move you past all the people who just write a book and throw it up and hope for the best, and into the group of people who stand out and earn more from their books. So whenever we think of barriers, we think of those as obstacles or almost liabilities, things that you have to overcome in order to get started. But for every obstacle or liability, we can have an opportunity or an asset. And the opportunity or the asset that you need to deploy whenever we're thinking about these barriers to entry is your unfair advantage. I can't think of who it was that actually coined that or used that term, but I love it. It's the idea that everyone has some sort of unfair advantage, something that you're good at just by nature of your experience or your upbringing, or maybe just your innate talents that other people might not necessarily have. Maybe it's connections, maybe it's networks. Regardless, everyone has some sort of advantage that other people don't have, and you need to lean on that. So one of Jessica's unfair advantages is that she's really, really good at website design and website building. She taught herself HTML whenever she was like in junior high, just because she was a nerd like that. So when she was launching her author business, she put her energies into developing a website and getting her Shopify store exactly the way that it needed to be. But if she had spent that same time doing something that isn't necessarily a strength for her, let's say cover design, then she would have wasted a lot of her time and energy to come up with a cover that really wasn't that good. So instead of paying somebody to set up a website for her and write all the code and do all that stuff, she did that herself and saved a ton of money so that she could take the money that she did have and invest it in a cover and in all the other things that maybe she didn't have that unfair advantage. In our family and in our business, we love the Strength Finders report. If you haven't done it, I highly encourage you to take the Strength Finders test. It ranks like all your strengths highest to lowest, and it can help you figure out what that unfair advantage is for you. And so you might be thinking like, this is great. I can spend my time doing the thing I'm good at, but I still have to pay for all the other stuff. Not necessarily. If you are in a group of authors like our author community and you can say, hey, I'm really good at website development, but I suck at cover designs or I suck at editing, dig into your network and look into sharing skills, bartering services. Maybe you can help somebody set up their website in return for cover design. This way you don't have to go start a whole side business doing author services for other people generating income and then turning around and using that in your business instead. You can just do those things for other people and barter services that way. Just make sure whenever you're doing it, you're keeping track and tabs on making sure that it's fair and equitable in both directions. Number two, maybe your business isn't generating cash for you, but you might have personal funds somewhere. You might have personal investments. You might have a day job or a side job or a freelance gig. It's okay to use your personal money to grow your business as a cash injection in the beginning, but you need to do it intentionally. When Jessica was starting her business, I was still working full-time at the bank, and so we were fortunate enough to have the income to be able to support her business. But what was interesting was, without having guardrails around how much we were willing to invest into her business, she felt trapped. She felt like she couldn't actually invest as much as she needed because even though I was telling her, just spend whatever you need and we'll make it work, having no boundaries and having no constraints actually limited her freedom to spend the money. She didn't want to invest in things unless they seemed absolutely necessary. And so we sat down and we decided, what things would you need in order to get this started? What costs do you have? Hard costs that you can't get out of? What training or courses would you like to have in order to get your business started? And what other things would you need? And we came up with a number and we said, well, this is now the number that you can work within. And that was actually really freeing for her because then she was able to say, well, now I know how much money I can spend on this and I'm free to spend whatever I want within that dollar amount. If you have investments that are earning money in the market, keep in mind that your business should be able to give you a return over and above what the market gives you. But this is where you have to be really intentional about how you spend your money. Are you going to get a return on investment because you bought the more expensive keyboard and more expensive mouse and the really pretty chair and all that? Probably not. So every dollar you spend, whenever you're using your own money or other people's money, needs to be intentional so that you can track that return on that investment to say, I put this much money in and I'm going to get this much money out. Just for some reference, most small businesses can expect to achieve a 50% return on their invested capital into their own business. So if you put $1,000 into your business, you should be able to get that $1,000 back plus another $500. And we usually want to see that happen within the first 12 months. So if you don't have a good game plan on how to see that that's going to happen, then maybe you should reconsider that investment into your business or where those funds are being directed. Now, the third thing is debt. And I typically don't recommend debt because once you start using debt to grow a business, it's really hard to get out of that cycle. But if you have exhausted all of your other options and you have to rely on debt, then there is a right way to do this. First, never use expensive debt. Never put anything on high interest credit cards that you can't pay off immediately. Never use those high interest or high fee credit. But if you have some sort of access to cheap credit, a 0% card for 12 months, 18 months, or any sort of other line of credit that you can get for a low interest rate and no fees, then there could be a right way to do this, but you need to be really careful. Just charging stuff to a card and hoping that you don't hit the credit limit and hoping that you can pay it back later is not a plan. But if you're saying I need money for cover design, editor, formatting, and website setup, and it's going to cost me this much, and you have a release date scheduled and you have anticipated sales, now you're starting to develop a plan. The most important thing is going to be to know how you're going to pay back that debt and still be able to set money aside for the next release. What you don't want to happen is for you to use debt to fund your first release and then still be paying that debt off whenever the second release comes and not have any money available to be able to fund the second release. So you need to set up some realistic cash flow projections to show that you can both pay off the debt by the time you need to fund the next release and be able to have money set aside for the next release at the same time. So for example, if you're going to release one book a year and you have 12 months from release 1 to release 2, then make a plan to be able to pay off the debt within 6 months and then use the next 6 months to save up for the next release. Now, no matter which strategy or combination of strategies that you use, you have to think about your business as a return on investment machine. You put stuff in and it should spit out more money than you put into it. But the stuff that you put in doesn't necessarily have to be cash. It can be your time, it can be your energy, it can be investment of services into other things. But the point is you're going to have to do something. You're going to have to either sacrifice time, energy, or money to make your business grow. Because it doesn't matter if you have a 10% return on investment or a 10,000% return on investment. 0 times any percentage is still 0. So if you're putting nothing into your business to grow, you're going to get nothing in return. You have to be willing to put something, and maybe that's money, maybe it's your own energy and time, but you have to put something into your business if you're going to expect to get something out of it. The trick is to maximize that return and spend money on the things that are going to generate the biggest return for you at the time. Now, I'm bad at asking for this, but if you haven't already, like and subscribe, please. It really helps me reach more authors with tips like this. And in the comments, if you can put some of the strategies that you've used to grow your business that maybe isn't necessarily just cash or debt, put those in the comments. I'd be interested to see what other people are doing. I hope that this was helpful, and I will see you next time.